My name is Eliza, and I'm 30 years old. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd end up locked in a basement, betrayed by the people I trusted most, and walking away from everything I once called home, I wouldn't have believed them. But here I am. And I promise you, this story is not what you think it is. It all began on a freezing afternoon in Salem, where the snow was falling like it never intended to stop. My fingers were trembling, not just from the cold, but from what I carried inside me, a secret no one in my family knew yet. I stood in front of my parents' door, gripping the small suitcase I had barely managed to pack after my separation from Mark. 3 months ago, we'd agreed to take time apart. But now I was pregnant and completely alone. When the door opened, my mother Vanessa greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Eliza, you're early," she said, her voice stiff as if I were an unexpected guest. Behind her, the house looked the same as always, neat, decorated, silent. Too silent. I walked in, my boots leaving wet prints on the polished floor. My father Thomas was in the den, reading his newspaper like it was any other day, like his daughter hadn't come home heartbroken and hollow. And then there was Jenna, my sister, the golden child. She appeared at the top of the stairs, perfectly styled, her phone in one hand and a wine glass in the other. "Look who finally returned," she said, her tone too sweet to be sincere. They thought I had come back defeated, broken, weak. But what they didn't know was that I had something growing inside me, and it wasn't just a child. It was fire. And I had no idea that by the end of this winter, that fire would burn every lie they tried to bury. I didn't expect hugs or celebration. But the quietness in the air that evening was sharp, like a blade hidden in velvet. Dinner was almost ready when I placed my coat on the rack and stepped into the dining room. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary bread filled the space. My mother Vanessa moved gracefully between the kitchen and the table, setting out dishes with the poise of a hostess, not a mother welcoming home her pregnant daughter. "Sit," she said with a thin smile. "Food's almost done." My father Thomas was already seated, eyes buried in the newspaper, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He didn't even look up when I entered. "Is your newspaper interesting, Dad?" I asked, attempting something, anything. A quiet grunt was his only reply. Jenna made her entrance last. With her perfectly tailored blazer and soft curls falling over her shoulders, she looked like she belonged on a billboard, not in the same room as me. She swirled the wine in her glass and took a sip before saying, "Busy day at work. The new client campaign's about to launch. Huge exposure." "That's wonderful," Vanessa beamed. "You work so hard." I focused on the food in front of me, swallowing despite the knot in my throat. I had once had a thriving design career, too, back before I'd given it up to support Mark's dreams and build a home. Now, that home was gone. I was just a pregnant woman in her childhood house, unwanted. Then, out of nowhere, Thomas lowered his paper. "Eliza, have you heard from Mark?" I nearly dropped my fork. "Yes," I replied carefully. "A little. Nothing's decided yet. Are you considering divorce?" His voice was neutral, but his gaze was like a spotlight. I don't know yet," I answered. "You haven't told him about the baby, have you?" Vanessa cut in, her words like a cold wind. "Not concern. Just irritation at the mess." "No," I whispered. "Not yet." The room fell silent again. But it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, filled with expectations I couldn't meet and judgments I never asked for. Then Jenna said it, blunt and bright as a slap. "Are you really planning to have this baby?" I stared at Jenna. My fork paused midair. "Of course I am," I said slowly, uncertain whether her question came from concern or something darker. "Why?" she pressed, tilting her head. "Can you even raise a child on your own? What about money? A job? You can't even fix things with Mark." "Jenna," my mother Vanessa interrupted, a tight smile on her face. "That's enough." "No, it's fine," I said, straightening my back. "It's a fair question. And the answer is yes. I can. And I will." But even as I spoke the words, my stomach churned, and not just from the pregnancy. The rest of the dinner passed in stiff silence, broken only by the occasional clink of cutlery. I knew then that this house, once my childhood home, was now simply a place where I happened to sleep. Later that evening, as I was helping Vanessa dry the dishes, Thomas made an announcement from the living room. "We're leaving the day after tomorrow. For Europe." I looked up. "Europe?" Vanessa nodded, wiping her hands.
"Yes."
"Paris, Rome, Barcelona. We've been planning it for 2 months." But I hesitated. "No one mentioned it to me." "We weren't sure you'd be staying this long," she said smoothly. "I took time off," Jenna chimed in proudly. "Finally, a real family vacation." For a moment, I just stood there. "Should I come too?" I asked. The room tensed. Jenna paused. Vanessa looked uncomfortable, and Thomas turned the page of his book without comment. "You're not feeling well," Vanessa said. "And considering your situation, it's best you rest here." I nodded slowly. "You're right. I do need rest." But deep down, I knew what this was. I was being excluded, removed, left behind again. The next morning was a blur of suitcase wheels, hairdryers, and zipped bags. The house buzzed with activity, none of it including me. I sat alone at the kitchen table, nibbling toast, sipping warm tea, and listening to their life move forward without me. When Jenna walked in, fully dressed in designer jeans and flawless makeup, she said cheerfully, "I can't wait to jog by the river in Paris. That view." "It sounds lovely," I said softly.
She paused.
"Is there anything you want me to bring you?" I smiled faintly.
"No."
"Nothing." I didn't want souvenirs. I wanted belonging, and that clearly wasn't packed in anyone's suitcase. That night, the house was unusually quiet. The bags were packed. The laughter was gone. And so was any illusion that I still belonged. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to silence the storm inside me. But sleep refused to come. Around midnight, the thirst became unbearable, so I slid out of bed and made my way quietly downstairs to the kitchen. The house creaked in soft places. The winter wind whispered through the cracks. As I poured myself a glass of water, I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned. Jenna stood there, arms folded, a look on her face I hadn't seen before. Not exactly anger, but something worse. Irritation mixed with something cruel. "Can't sleep?" she asked casually. "No," I replied. "You?" She shrugged. "Too excited about the trip." I nodded. "Enjoy it." For a moment, I thought she might walk away. But then she took a step closer and said, "I'm worried about you." Her tone had shifted. Lower, sharper. "Why?" I asked. "This pregnancy," she said. "Are you really going to go through with it?" I inhaled slowly.
"Yes."
"I already told you."
She didn't reply.
Instead, her voice rose. "You always think you're stronger than you are, but you're not. You can't even survive without crawling back here." "Jenna," I warned. "No," she snapped. "You're in the way. You're always in the way. Just have your baby and disappear already." "What did you just say?" Before I could react, she grabbed my arm, hard. "Come with me," she hissed. "What are you doing? Let go." But I was no match for her. Not like this. Not pregnant, drained, and barefoot. She dragged me across the hallway, past the laundry room, to the old basement door. "Jenna, stop. What are you doing?" She didn't answer. She flung open the door, pulled me down the stairs, and shoved me hard. I slipped.
My foot missed the bottom step.
I reached for the railing, but my hand grazed air. I hit the cold basement floor with a thud that echoed. Stunned, I looked up just in time to see her face one last time. "Good luck with your babysitting," she said coldly and slammed the door shut. Seconds later, I heard it.
Click.
She'd locked it. I was alone, in the dark.
Trapped.
For the first few minutes, I didn't move. I lay on the basement floor, curled on my side, heart pounding, one hand protectively over my stomach. Then the reality hit. She locked me in.
Jenna locked me in.
I scrambled to the door, banging on it with my fists. "Open the door. Vanessa."
"Thomas."
"Anyone." My voice cracked from the force of it. No answer. No footsteps. Just silence. I jiggled the knob. It didn't budge. There was no bolt on my side. No light except for a small rectangular window near the ceiling where faint moonlight filtered in through snow-dusted glass. My breath grew short. I was really trapped. And I was pregnant. Panic surged up my spine like ice water. My body shook, not just from the cold concrete, but from the betrayal itself. My own sister had done this. And my parents must have known. There was no way they didn't hear me scream. Hours passed. I lost track of time. I shouted until my throat burned, then collapsed beside a stack of dusty boxes. That's when I saw it, an old cardboard box, half crushed and labeled kitchen storage. I pulled it closer. Inside were a few bottles of water, 2 cans of soup, stale bread, and a flashlight with weak batteries. So they planned this. They didn't want me dead. They just wanted me out of the way. I didn't cry. Not yet. The shock hadn't faded enough for tears. I sat against the far wall, hands around my knees, trying to regulate my breathing. Eventually, curiosity overtook the dread. I stood and explored the room, taking slow steps across the cold cement floor. That's when I found the wine cellar, racks and racks of dusty bottles. And just beside them, an old wooden trunk. Inside the trunk was a photo album. I flipped it open slowly. At first, it was harmless, childhood photos. My parents when they were young. Jenna and me at the beach. Then, I turned a page. My heart stopped. There they were, Mark and Jenna, arms around each other, on a beach, in a restaurant, laughing, holding hands, and not old pictures. These were recent, during our separation. That's when everything cracked inside me. The lies, the betrayal, my sister, my husband, and now this prison. But something else came with that crack, something cold and clear. I wouldn't just survive this. I would destroy them. The next morning, I didn't beg. I didn't scream. I planned. I went over every photo in the album again, committing the images to memory. I stacked them aside carefully. Evidence. Then I examined the rest of the basement, every corner, every drawer, every box. That's when I found the toolbox beneath an old cabinet. It held a few rusty screwdrivers, pliers, and a small hammer. The window was too high, embedded in concrete. The hinges of the basement door were on the outside. Escape wasn't happening. But revenge, that was possible. I turned back to Thomas's vintage wine collection, the one he bragged about every Thanksgiving. There was one bottle he'd always described as his pride, a 1978 Bordeaux, unopened for decades. I uncorked it, watching the dark red liquid swirl. It looked exactly like blood. And that gave me an idea. I found a large bowl, filled it with the wine, and carefully widened the gap under the basement door using the pliers and screwdriver. The old wood splintered just enough to allow a thin stream of liquid to pass through and poured. They'd gone to Europe for a 10-day tour. By now, 10 days had passed. They were due home tomorrow morning.
Perfect.
I spent that last night preparing. I lined up the incriminating photos near the stairs. I set the flashlight beside me, ready to shine it under my chin when they opened the door. No screaming. No crying. Just fear.
For them.
Morning arrived with the sound of tires crunching snow. Suitcases being pulled. Laughter. Then footsteps. Then, what the hell is that? Vanessa's voice. High-pitched.
Panicked.
Is that Thomas? Is that blood? I had just begun pouring the last bowl of wine across the cement floor, letting it spread under the door like a slow, bleeding memory. Jenna. Thomas shouted. Call 911. Now. I could hear them rushing around, screaming, chaos blooming upstairs. Then came the click of the lock. The door burst open with a creak and a flood of white light. Thomas stood there, gun in hand, his face pale. I stood calmly in the middle of the basement, the wine at my feet, the photo album in my hands. Welcome home, I said quietly. Thomas lowered the gun an inch, but didn't speak. Behind him, Vanessa appeared, her hands trembling as she clutched the doorframe. Her face paled at the sight of me standing there, not bleeding, not broken, just waiting. Then came Jenna, breathless and confused. She froze at the top of the basement stairs, her mouth falling open. I tilted my head. Hi, Jenna. Did you enjoy Paris?
She didn't reply.
Her eyes darted to the bowl of wine and then to the photo album in my hand. I climbed the stairs slowly, not rushing, each step deliberate. My fingers grazed the wooden rail she had shoved me against. In the living room, no one sat. They hovered like guilty statues. I assume you weren't planning on letting me out, I said, voice cold but even. Vanessa started to speak, but Jenna cut in. Because you were in the way. Jenna. Vanessa hissed. No, Mom, it's too late. She already knows. Jenna's voice cracked, her mascara slightly smudged now. David and I were happy. She ruined it by staying pregnant. I stared at her. His name is Mark, Jenna. But go on. She laughed bitterly. Mark never smiled with you. He smiled with me. I didn't react. Not externally. Inside, a small piece of my heart shattered, but I'd been through worse now. I placed the photos down on the coffee table. Mark and Jenna together, in restaurants, on beaches, in his arms. Mark's voice echoed from the hallway before he appeared. Is anyone home? Everyone froze. And then he stepped in. When he saw me, standing there alive, his face turned ghostly. Eliza, he whispered. Hello, Mark. Europe looked beautiful in the pictures, I said as I gestured to the table. His gaze dropped. Then to Jenna. You told me she'd gone to stay with friends. She was supposed to be locked in the basement. Jenna blurted. Vanessa turned away. Thomas sat down heavily on the edge of the couch, face in his hands. Mark looked like he'd been punched. You did what? I was trapped, I said. And I'm pregnant with your child, Mark. Silence hit the room like thunder. You what? He said, backing up a step. And now, I added, pulling out my phone. I'm calling someone else. Jenna stepped forward. Please don't. We're family. I stared her down. Not anymore. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked upstairs, packed my small suitcase in silence, and left the house without looking back. My mother called after me. Eliza, please don't make this worse than it is. Worse? They locked me in a basement. They betrayed me. They tried to erase me. But I had survived. And I wasn't going to disappear like they'd hoped. I took a cab straight to a place a nurse had once mentioned to me during a routine checkup, the Haven House, a women's shelter for domestic abuse survivors, expectant mothers, and women rebuilding their lives. I didn't think I qualified. Until now. The intake counselor, Sandra, greeted me with a warmth I hadn't felt in weeks. No judgment. No pity. Just quiet understanding. This is a safe place, she said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. You don't owe anyone anything right now. They gave me a clean room with soft bedding, warm meals, and most importantly, silence. I slept 12 hours straight that first night. The next morning, I met with the in-house legal advisor. Her name was Attorney Harris, and she didn't flinch once as I told her my story. You have a solid case, she said firmly. False imprisonment, assault, emotional endangerment of a pregnant woman. And with photo evidence and your medical report, they won't walk away from this. For the first time in weeks, I felt something flicker inside me. Hope. Sandra brought me herbal tea that night. She sat beside me in the common room while the television played softly in the background. Do you want to press charges? She asked gently. I didn't hesitate. Yes. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about never letting anyone do this to another woman again. Within days, Attorney Harris filed the official charges. Vanessa, Thomas, Jenna, all three named. The court date was set. I wasn't going back to that house. But they were going somewhere. And I'd be there in court, strong and unshaken, to watch the door close behind them this time. The morning of the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse steps, one hand resting lightly over my growing belly. 28 weeks now. I had started to feel little kicks in the night, gentle, fluttering reminders that I was no longer alone. Inside, The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in tension. Vanessa, Thomas, and Jenna sat on the defense side, looking smaller than I had ever seen them. Jenna's confidence was gone. Her lips pressed into a flat line. Thomas stared blankly ahead. Vanessa wouldn't look at me. I walked in, shoulders square, chin lifted, flanked by Attorney Harris. The judge called us to order. My lawyer began with precision. Your Honor, this is not simply a case of family disagreement. My client, Eliza, was forcibly confined in a locked basement while pregnant. She was denied medical attention, isolated, and emotionally traumatized. We present not only photographic evidence of the abuse, but also text messages, medical reports, and physical signs of unlawful confinement. The courtroom grew still. The judge's brows furrowed as the photographs were passed forward. The wine-stained basement floor, the bruising on my arms, the storage food, and finally, the photo album. Page after page of Jenna and Mark together. Jenna whispered something to her attorney. The judge noticed. Miss Jenna, he said, would you like to address the court? Jenna stood up. Her voice cracked. She wasn't supposed to get hurt. We just needed time to think. To fix everything. By locking her in a basement. The judge asked sharply, do you think that qualifies as a solution? She sat down without answering. Vanessa tried to speak next. She was going to ruin everything. Mark was happier. You were only thinking about yourselves, the judge interrupted. After final arguments, the judge leaned back, reviewing the evidence one more time. Then came the verdict. For the charges of unlawful imprisonment, emotional abuse, and endangerment of a pregnant woman, I hereby sentence Jenna to 15 years in state prison. Vanessa and Thomas are each sentenced to 10 years. No parole. No suspended time. The bailiff stepped forward. I didn't look at them as they were let out. I just closed my eyes and exhaled. Justice had spoken. And now, I could finally breathe. The next few months passed like the slow bloom of spring after a harsh winter. I stayed at the Haven House, the same shelter that had become more than just a refuge. It was now home. Sandra checked on me daily, offering herbal teas, light conversation, and space when I needed it. Oliver, though unborn, was with me every second. I spoke to him as I folded donated baby clothes, rubbed my belly when he kicked, and smiled at the thought of his tiny hand wrapping around my finger someday. The other women at the shelter became a small, supportive circle, warriors in their own right. We shared meals, shared stories, shared quiet, healing silences. Attorney Harris visited once to finalize paperwork. The appeal had been denied. The verdict stood. Vanessa, Thomas, and Jenna were all behind bars. No parole hearings. No letters. No apologies. I hadn't heard from Mark either, not officially. Sandra had told me that he had tried to visit the shelter twice, but she'd turned him away each time, just as I'd asked. He'd also sent a letter, which I refused to read. There was nothing left to say. I was now 34 weeks pregnant, and the staff helped me prepare for the hospital stay. We toured the nearby clinic. The nurses knew I was a shelter resident, no judgment there either, only warmth. Each day, I journaled. I wrote letters to Oliver that I'd one day give him when he turned 18. Letters that told the truth, not to hurt him, but to show him where we came from and how far we'd risen. I had also started freelance design work again, small gigs, logos, online banners. Sandra helped me set up an email and online profile. One night, after completing a project, I whispered to Oliver, "We're going to be just fine, you and I." On the 93rd night since I left my parents' house, I was folding a newborn onesie when it hit me. A dull ache in my back, then a tightening in my stomach. It took a second for me to understand. Labor. Sandra, I called, already breathless. She rushed in. "I'm calling 911. Stay with me." The next chapter of my life had begun. Not in pain, but in power. The ambulance ride was a blur of flashing lights, leather straps, and Sandra's voice keeping me grounded. "You're okay, Eliza. Just breathe." It wasn't easy. The contractions came fast and sharp, like waves crashing against a cliff. But I kept thinking of one thing, one name. Oliver. At the hospital, I was rushed into a delivery room. Nurses moved like clockwork, prepping me while speaking in calm, measured tones. My palms were slick with sweat, my breaths short and shallow. I remember gripping the bed rail and thinking, he's almost here. We're almost there. The doctor smiled as she checked the monitors. You're doing beautifully. Just a little longer. The pain was intense, a different kind of pain from what I'd been through in that basement. This wasn't the pain of betrayal or loneliness. This was the pain of becoming. 3 hours passed. Then it happened. With one final push, and a scream that came from every part of me. The room filled with the sound of new life.
A cry.
Not mine.
His.
My son's. Tears blurred my vision as they placed him on my chest, warm, soft, crying alive. Welcome to the world, Oliver, I whispered. He quieted as I spoke. His tiny hand twitched against my chest like he already knew my voice. My fingers ran over his hair, his wrinkled forehead, his perfect little nose. He was here. He was safe. Sandra stood by the doorway, eyes glistening. He's beautiful, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, I said, still in awe. He's everything. I named him Oliver James, James after my grandfather, the only person in my family who had ever made me feel safe. The nurses cleaned him, wrapped him in a soft blue blanket, and handed him back to me. I sat there holding my son, rocking gently, the sun rising through the hospital window. Outside, the world had gone on. But inside that room, time paused. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready. We were ready. Me and Oliver, we had survived the worst. And now, the only thing left was life. It was late afternoon when I returned to the Haven house from the hospital, cradling Oliver in my arms. Sandra had prepared my room while I was gone. Fresh sheets, a tiny bassinet, and a handwritten card that simply said, "Welcome home, baby Oliver." The shelter women took turns peeking in, offering gentle smiles and soft congratulations. One even crocheted a tiny blue hat with a matching blanket. I sat in the rocking chair near the window, Oliver asleep on my chest, when I heard a soft knock. Sandra stepped in, holding her phone. Her expression was hesitant. "It's Mark," she said quietly. "He's outside." I didn't move. My heart didn't race. I felt still. "He's asked if he can talk to you. Just for a few minutes. Says it's about Oliver." I looked down at my son. His little lips parted, fingers curled like question marks. "Let him in," I said after a long pause. "But only here. And I want you in a room." Sandra nodded and left. A few minutes later, Mark entered slowly, holding a small bouquet of white daisies and a wrapped gift bag. His eyes landed on Oliver, then darted back to mine. They were glassy, red-rimmed. "Eliza," he whispered. "He's beautiful." "I know." He stepped closer but stopped when he sensed the distance between us wasn't physical. "I'm sorry," he said, voice shaking. "For everything. For choosing her. For not standing by you. For not knowing what I had until I lost it." I looked at him, letting the silence stretch. "You didn't just lose me, Mark. You lost your son." He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. "You were part of what happened to me. You knew she hated me. You knew I was vulnerable. And still, you chose her." "I ended it," he said desperately. "After I found out, I left her. I wanted to come back." "You don't get to come back." He blinked, as if the words had physically struck him. "You'll never see him," I said softly but with finality.
Not now.
Not ever. Mark's shoulders dropped. He nodded once, eyes full of regret. Then he left, and I closed the door. Behind him. Forever. 6 weeks later, the snow melted. The sidewalks of Salem were lined with budding trees, and the scent of fresh earth followed each passing breeze. Spring had arrived, not just in the air, but in my bones. Oliver and I had moved into a small rental apartment just a few blocks from the shelter. It wasn't fancy, 2 rooms, a tiny kitchen, and a balcony that caught the morning sun, but it was ours. Every morning, I brewed coffee while Oliver babbled from his bassinet. I had resumed my freelance design work full-time. One of my recent logo projects got picked up by a mid-sized wellness brand. It wasn't luck. It was mine. Earned. Sandra still visited. So did a few women from the shelter. They helped paint Oliver's nursery, soft sage green with gold stars. His name was stenciled across the wall. Oliver James, brave from the start. I sometimes walked past the courthouse when taking Oliver for strolls. I never looked at the building too long. The case was closed, the sentences final. Vanessa, Thomas, and Jenna were now just names in a file. I had blocked Mark's number. Sandra still received occasional letters from him, which I'd instructed her to discard. I didn't want apologies. I wanted peace. And I had found it. That evening, as the sky turned a warm rose gold, I held Oliver in my arms, rocking gently on the small balcony. He looked up at me with those round, trusting eyes, the kind of gaze that made every bruise, every betrayal, every locked door worth surviving. "I won't let the world hurt you," I whispered. "And if it tries, it'll have to go through me." He gurgled, his tiny hand brushing against my cheek. I smiled. This wasn't the life I had planned. It was the one I had claimed, built brick by broken brick. No more basements. No more shadows. No more pretending. Just me. And my son. And a sky with no ceiling. Because I hadn't just walked away from my past. I had buried it. And from that soil, Oliver and I were growing something new. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more true-to-life stories filled with emotion, justice, and strength. Your support helps us bring more voices to light. Thank you for watching.